How I Met the Monster in My Closet by Unknown. Everyone has heard of the boogeyman, a creature tall and dark who comes out at night and preys on fearful children. The story is a classic tale, one that every kid and their neighbor like to scare with each other with during sleepovers. People have come up with several different versions of the story, like how the boogeyman only comes out during the full moon, how it can transform itself into your greatest fears, or how it lives under your bed and waits for the right moment, right when you are most vulnerable, and it snatches you. But I know the truth. There is no such thing as the boogeyman. No, there is only something far different, something that strays from the legends, something that you won't expect. How do I know this, you might ask? It's because I saw the thing with my very eyes. I was 11 years old when it happened. I live in a relatively quiet home in the suburbs with my mother and father. Being only a child, I had the privilege of getting everything I asked for. I had a large bedroom, all to myself, and it was filled with a vast assortment of toys, video games, dolls, whatever I wanted. I admit I was quite the spoiled child. As the weeks went by and storage space in my room got a little more crowded, my parents decided it was time that I got a place to store all my junk, and that wasn't on the floor. So, a few weeks prior to when it happened, they found an old secondhand closet at Goodwill and decided that it would fit nicely in my room. As the 11-year-old I was, I didn't have much of an opinion of the closet, and I just let my parents place it wherever and clean it up how they wanted it to be. Several days passed by without anything abnormal happening. I saw my friends from time to time and otherwise occupied myself by playing games. Days turned into weeks, and soon enough the closet was cluttered with my crap. Dust and cobwebs collected at the top, bite marks framed the door, and a part of the corner had been chipped off due to my friends being a little too careless when we were roughhousing. If the secondhand closet looked old before, it aged quite rapidly after spending a few weeks in my bedroom. Thinking back, there was something about the closet that had always felt a little off. It was like I got this bad feeling, like shivers, every time I got close to it, but as the kid I was, I took a little to no notice and brushed it off like it was nothing. The night it happened, I was playing with my favorite stuffies, making the play fight with each other. My playtime was interrupted by my mother calling me from the outside of my door and telling me that it was time for bed. I reluctantly put my stuffies away in the closet and crawled in the bed. My mother tucked me in, peppered a few kisses on my cheek, and closed the lights as she left the room. I knew that I should have gone to sleep, but at the time, I just couldn't. I tried. I really did, but I just had too much pent-up energy. I wanted to keep playing with my stuffies, not sleep. Surely 10 more minutes wouldn't hurt, I thought to myself. Well, I rolled over and watched the door for a few moments until I saw the light from around the border flick off. That meant that Mom and Dad have gone to bed. I sat up and instantly got to work opening my nightlight, then pattered over towards the old closet. In the dim light, the closet felt like it was towering over my little body. I never really realized how tall it was until then. I felt myself shivering as I neared the piece of furniture, which I found odd because I didn't feel cold at all. Dismissing this, I reached up and opened the door as silently as I could, not to alert my parents, and I looked in. Toys and cards and board games were scattered messily along the closet ground. Unable to really see, I reached in blindly, attempting to find my favorite stuffy, but to no avail. Frowning, I leaned my body forward, then suddenly I felt myself tumbling forward and straight into the mess, the door behind me croaking loudly as I did so. I fumbled for a few minutes trying to catch my footing, but found that it was impossible to stand up with all the clutter around me. I scrambled forwards, trying to find the walls of the closet so I could support myself, but I couldn't seem to find it, no matter how far out I reached. Instead, I stumbled over myself once more and felt my body drop. A slight panic rose in my chest as I scurried backwards and finally felt myself push open the closet door and tumble out. I sat there on the floor, breathing heavily while allowing myself to calm down. It took a moment, but as my eyes adjusted to my surroundings, I quickly realized that I wasn't in my room anymore. I knew this because I could see the faint outlines of the walls rather than compared to my large, spacey room. This place was tiny. Not only that, but I could feel something soft and woven underneath where I sat, which was a contrast from the hard, cold floors of my own room. I stood and pattered towards the forwards cautiously until I hit into something large and stiff. I wasn't sure exactly what I bumped into, but before I had a chance to reach out and touch it, I heard a quiet click. A light had been turned on, causing me to hiss and squint my eyes in order to adjust from the darkness. I opened up my eyes and was finally able to see my surroundings. I was in a bedroom of sorts. It was small and painted in a light pink color that was adorned with several. A high pitched sound coming from behind me interrupted my thoughts. I froze in an instant, and there was something else here. I wasn't alone. I swallowed and turned around. Before me, at a little distance, stood the form of a being I had only heard about in night terrors. The skin was pale and withered, with splotches of deep red stained underneath its wide, beady eyes. Its head, abnormally round, and long, disheveled strands of hair matted its face. Two oval-shaped bulges stood out from either side of its face, partially hidden by its strands of hair, but still very much visible. Perhaps the most disturbing feature on its face being the wart placed in the center that oozed clear liquid out of its holes. Its physique, on the other hand, stood quite short in stature. Its body was oddly symmetrical and proportionate, with bones barely visible through skin due to excess flesh and meat on the creature's body. Its slender limbs had curled in on themselves and its paws protruded out round claws at its tips. A fresh wave of fear consumed my being as I locked eyes with the monster, who stood as still as I was. I couldn't move an inch of my body, motor functions freezing as they had lost all responses. But then, without warning, it started moving slowly towards me. It was quivering, twitching, and it moved its limbs in a tentative way, one short appendage stretching itself in front of the other. It stopped, quickly and suddenly. I could see the figure's thin torso breathing in and out in a regular pace. Breath coming in, nothing more than a series of horrifying wheezes. My heart skipped a beat, and I shook in my spot. My own breath labored my panic. I stared into the creature's dark eyes and swallowed. Thicker this time, forcing back a ball of anticipation that stuck with it. Any moment now, any sudden movement, and this thing would jump at me, and that would be it. I shifted my eyes around the room, but there was so little space, nowhere to run. The only exit was being blocked off by the monster. But then something strange happened. The creature backed away and started making noises. Croaks and cracks and strange sounds came out of the thing's mouth, its facial expressions morphing as it mumbled, its eyes leaking some kind of clear liquid. Was it trying to say something? Was it trying to threaten me? It had to be. There was no other fact but its voice. Its voice sounded minuscule. It was as frightened as I was. Surely it wasn't trying to talk to me. I stared at the creature. My thought process told me that maybe I could try to communicate with it long enough to stall it and run until I could make it back to safety. And so I allowed a simple, cautious word to escape my lips and interject the creature's incoherent sounds. Hello? And then there was silence. The creature stiffened at my words, wide eyes becoming impossibly wider and pink mouth dropping down into what I recognized as an expression of shock. I thought for a moment that maybe it understood me until an ear-piercing wail erupted with the monster. The creature threw its head back and shrieked a terrible sound that I have never heard in my life, being nothing short of purely animalistic. In my frozen state, I could see a light begin to illuminate from the small crack of the door and a series of heavy banging sounds that came from closer and closer to the room, getting louder as they did so. That's when I realized what was happening. It was calling its sisters. Realization dawned on me as fast as a panic rose in my chest. The only thoughts going through my head at the moment was that what if I didn't get out now? Surely I was going to die. I was going to die without my family never knowing where I went or what happened to me. The banging noises got closer as I began to hear the sound of the other creatures getting closer. Their voices were deeper and less shrill than that of the thing in front of me, but caused shivers in my bones anyway. I had to get out, but how? I looked behind the creature, and sure enough, the exact replica of my closet stood up against pink walls. Adrenaline shot through me, and I suddenly regained control of my legs, and I made a dash for it, clumsily avoiding the creature as I bolted past it and straight into the familiarity of the wooden closet. I latched onto the handle and tore open the door with might I didn't know I contained. I hauled myself through the door and went to slam it shut, but before stopping myself last second, I realized quickly that the sound would only alert the monsters of my location. I curled up and stayed as still as possible, as quiet as possible. Through the thin crack of the door, I could only see the back of the monster and not its face. The banging noise coming from its sister ceased, but I could now clearly hear their voices, and I knew they must have arrived, standing somewhere I could not see them. Muffled sounds and thuds were all I heard for a couple of moments before the new figure came into my field of vision, and I felt paralyzed as a new wave of fear that overtook me. The thing was massive. It appeared to look like a fully fledged version of the wailing creature, a developed version. It crouched down to hold the smaller creature. What seemed like a hoarse soothing sounds came from its mouth. It appeared to work, because the little creature slowly calmed down from its hysteria. Another, even deeper voice came from behind the door, as I could not see the little creature responded to it. Unintelligible sounds came from its mouth, but to my horror, it stretched out its limbs and to point right in my direction, right to where I was hiding. I could see the shadow of an even larger creature stepping towards my direction, and I flinched harshly, blind panic escaping me. I swallowed hard, willing the blur in my vision to disappear, but it refused. I shut my eyes and scooted backwards as far as I could, bracing myself for the worst. I kept crawling back and back, waiting for the moment the light would come in and expose my identity. Except it never came. Instead, I felt my back hitting into several little items. They clattered all around me as I pushed backwards in fearful determination to get away. Then I felt myself hitting what must have been the door of the closet, and I tumbled out, backflipping painfully through a clutter of toys until I finally rolled out of the dark closet. For a long moment, I simply laid there in my front, curled in the fetal position, unwilling to move. I hugged myself tightly with all my limbs to try and stop my body from shaking, but it didn't do much. Then finally, I willed one of my eyes open. I was back in my room. I was back in my room. I couldn't believe it. Nothing had changed from since I left. I saved the toys for what was now scattered all around me. The closet doors were closed, and then I did the only thing I could think of in that moment. I screamed. I had no idea how long I was screaming for, but all I knew was that my voice was starting to break, and I could no longer keep back the cries of absolute anguish I had been holding in for me. I was too out of it to notice the banging of my parents' footsteps making their way over to my room, or their voices calling out frantically. I didn't process the lights being turned on, and only snapped out of my trance when my mother so softly and soothingly reached out her little arms to cradle me to her bony chest. "Sweetheart, what's wrong? Tell Mommy what's wrong." Closet," I rasped and reached out an arm to point directly at the closet. Both my mother and father shot their 8 bright eyes to each other, and then to the closet, then back to me. It was my mother who spoke first. "Oh, sweetie, what's wrong with the closet?" Monster," I mumbled, shoving my face deeper into the comfort of her bones. I heard my mother whisper something to my father, but I couldn't quite make out what they were saying. I felt a slender, clawed hand run circles up and down my back. "Daddy's gonna have a look in the closet, okay?" My mother whispered it to me in her calm voice. I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell my father to stop before it was too late, but I couldn't. The words literally dying in my throat as if something in me physically wilted and died. I dared to peek 2 of my eyes open and watched as he opened the closet doors without a moment of hesitation and found nothing. There was nothing there except a messy pile of toys and a wooden wall behind it. My father smiled, exposing his sharp fangs in a reassuring way. "See, kiddo? Nothing to be worried about." But it was there. There were 3 of them, with 2 arms and legs that had so much hair and so much flesh. And my mother shushed me and rocked me gently. "Shh, you're really tired, honey. There's nothing else, see? Now, why don't we go back to sleep? Oh, here, why don't you take Mr. Fluffles with you?" Mr. Fluffles, my favorite stuffy, had been sprawled out on the ground right beside me, its one eye and cute, toothless smile bored straight at me. My father bent over and took Mr. Fluffles into his bristly arms and guided me out of my mother's arms to heft me into his own. He shuffled over to my bedside and placed me onto my bed, tucking me and Mr. Fluffles in and placed a kiss on my forehead. A wave of exhaustion overcame me, and I couldn't help to stifle a yawn. I heard my mother chuckle lightly as she stood outside my father at the edge of my bed. "Are you going to be okay to sleep now, sweetie?" Despite the shock I felt all over my body, I nodded my head slowly. I was just too tired. I didn't want to play anymore. I just wanted to sleep. Sleep and pretend this never happened. The last thing I heard before I lost consciousness was my father whispering, "Remember, kiddo, there's no such thing as the boogeyman," and that was something I was sure of. Thank you. That was the boogeyman.